Imagine you are standing in a muddy, rain-soaked field on the outskirts of Shanghai. It's early 2019, and the air is thick with the scent of wet earth and industrial ambition. In front of you, the world's most eccentric billionaire is dancing on a stage to a cheering crowd. This wasn't just a celebration, it was a pivot point for global history. At the time, Tesla was the first foreign automaker ever allowed to own 100% of its Chinese operations without a local partner. You probably think this was just a lucky break for Elon Musk, but it leaves us with one big question. Why did a government known for tight control give the keys to the city to a man who thrives on chaos? Back in 2018, the situation for Tesla was actually pretty dire. The company was burning through cash like it was kindled for a bonfire. They were struggling to scale up the Model 3 in California. Elon Musk famously called this period production hell. If they didn't find a way to build cars cheaper and faster, the company was going to hit a brick wall. That's when China entered the frame with a golden ticket. Beijing had a problem of its own to solve. They wanted to lead the world in electric vehicles, but their domestic brands were lagging behind. They needed a catalyst to spark a revolution. They needed a catfish to jump into the pond and make the local fish swim faster. So they made Musk an offer that no other CEO had ever received. The deal was truly unprecedented. Historically, any car company moving into China had to partner with a local firm. This meant sharing profits and, more importantly, sharing technology. It was a 50-50 split that often felt like a tax on foreign success. Musk refused to play by those rules. He held out until China literally changed its own investment laws specifically to accommodate him. This was a massive win, but it came with heavy expectations. The factory, known as Giga Shanghai, had to be built at a speed the world had never seen. We are talking about turning a swamp into a functional assembly line in less than a year. The stakes were incredibly high. If Musk failed to meet the production targets, he risked losing the massive loans provided by Chinese state banks. There was plenty of drama behind the scenes during the negotiations. American politicians were watching with raised eyebrows. They wondered why a man deeply involved with U.S. space secrets was getting so cozy with a rival superpower. On the other side, Chinese officials were betting their professional reputations on a foreign disruptor. Some economists still debate whether China gave up too much control in this specific deal. Some argue it was a masterstroke to force Chinese companies like BYD to innovate through direct competition. Others think it was a calculated risk that gave Tesla a temporary lifeline while setting a long-term trap for its intellectual property. At the time, reporting showed that the land for the factory was leased at a massive discount. It was a red carpet rollout of epic proportions. But as any seasoned negotiator knows, a red carpet often leads to a very specific destination. For Musk, that destination was a market of over 1 billion people. For China, the goal was the Tesla effect. They didn't just want the cars, they wanted the entire supply chain to move into their backyard. This wasn't just a business deal, it was a geopolitical marriage of convenience. If you look at the fine print, the honeymoon was designed to be productive, but the prenuptial agreement was strictly in Beijing's favor. Building a factory in a foreign land is never cheap. For Musk, the price tag was hovering around $2 billion just to get the first phase moving. Usually, a company would have to dip into its own pockets or ask Wall Street for a massive loan. But in this story, the money didn't come from New York or London. Instead, you look at the gleaming skyscrapers of Shanghai's financial district and see the true source of the capital. A group of Chinese state-owned banks stepped up with a massive low-interest loan package. We are talking about names like the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China and the China Construction Bank. They basically handed over $1 billion handshake to a man who, at the time, was being mocked by short sellers back home. This wasn't a charity donation. The terms were specific and, frankly, quite intense. The loans were non-recourse, which is a fancy way of saying the debt was tied only to the Shanghai factory itself. If the project failed, the banks wouldn't go after Tesla's American assets. They would simply take the factory and everything inside it. It was a high-stakes gamble where the house always had a way to win. You see the sheer scale of this commitment when you realize that $500 million was just the starting point. Reports from the time showed a total financing package reaching over $1.4 billion. That is enough cash to fill a literal mountain of briefcases. There was a palpable sense of tension in the air during these months. Back in California, Tesla was still fighting for its life. Musk was sleeping on the factory floor in Fremont to keep the Model 3 lines moving. Meanwhile, Halfway across the world, he was trusting a foreign government with the future of his company. Some people in Washington were starting to get nervous. They wondered if Musk was becoming too dependent on a regime that could flip a switch and shut him down at any moment. Finance people still go back and forth on whether this was a brilliant escape or a dangerous trap. Some argue that Musk used Chinese capital to save Tesla from a total collapse during its darkest hour. Others point out that by accepting this money, he effectively became a high-profile hostage to Beijing's industrial goals. The drama wasn't just about the money, it was about the catfish effect. This is a concept often used in Chinese business circles. The idea is that if you put a big, aggressive catfish, Tesla, into a pond of lazy domestic fish, the local companies will have to swim faster or die. This wasn't just about helping Musk, it was about forcing Chinese companies like BYD to level up their game. You might think this would make local car companies angry, and it did. When the first Shanghai-made Model 3S started rolling off the line at lower prices, local competitors saw their earnings plummet. You notice a shift in the power dynamic during this phase. Musk was no longer just a tech CEO, he was an instrument of Chinese industrial policy. He was the catalyst that would turn China into the world's electric vehicle superpower. But every dollar borrowed had to be paid back, and every car built in Shanghai made Tesla more tied to the land. The speed of the build was mesmerizing, but the weight of the debt was starting to settle. It was a billion-dollar handshake that felt warm at first, but the grip was starting to tighten. Think back to that muddy field in Nicheng. It was a place locals literally called Mudtown. Within just 168 working days, that wasteland was transformed into a fully functioning automotive powerhouse. To put that in perspective, building a typical car plant in the West can take years of permits, environmental studies, and slow-moving construction. But in Shanghai, you notice a different kind of physics at play. This was Elon speed meeting Chinese industrial mobilization. It was a display of raw power that left the rest of the global auto industry in a state of shock. The scene at the construction site was something out of a sci-fi movie. Day and night, the horizon was lit up by massive stadium lights. Thousands of workers were housed in temporary on-site dorms, moving in 3 shifts to keep the momentum going 24 hours a day. You watch as steel pillars rise from the dirt like they are growing in time-lapse. Reporting from that year noted that parts of the factory were assembled like giant Lego blocks, with pre-built sections being slotted into place with surgical precision. By the time most people had even heard about the project, the roof was already being sealed. But this incredible pace wasn't just about hard work. It was about a government clearing every possible hurdle. Regulations that usually take months to navigate were handled in days. Grid connections that might take a year were prioritized and finished in a fraction of that time. There was an intense, almost frantic energy behind the project. You can almost feel the heat of the pressure on the ground. If Tesla didn't start rolling cars off the line by the end of the year, the financial consequences would have been catastrophic for the company's stock price. Analysts still argue about whether this level of speed came at a hidden cost. Some suggest that such rapid construction could have bypassed important safety or environmental safeguards that are standard in other countries. Others maintain that it simply proved how inefficient Western manufacturing has become compared to a synchronized state-backed effort. In late 2019, the impossible happened. Less than a year after the first shovel hit the dirt, the first Model 3s were rolling off the assembly line. It was a moment of pure triumph for Musk, who had bet his entire reputation on this factory. By early 2020, regular customers were already taking delivery of cars that didn't exist even as a blueprint a year earlier. The scale of what started in that mud is hard to wrap your head around today. By late 2025, reports confirmed that this single factory had already churned out over 4 million vehicles. That is enough cars to stretch from Shanghai to New York and back. What began as a desperate gamble in a swamp had become the most productive electric vehicle plant on the planet, but as the factory reached its full power, the relationship between Musk and his hosts began to shift from simple cooperation to something much more complex. The factory was a miracle, sure, but it was also a very permanent anchor in a very specific part of the world. By 2021, the honeymoon phase between Tesla and Beijing was facing its first real test. You notice a change in the atmosphere. The same government that cleared every obstacle for Musk suddenly began to tighten the reins. It started with a whisper about data. In early 2021, reports surfaced that the Chinese military had banned Tesla vehicles from entering its housing complexes and sensitive facilities. The reason? They were worried about the cameras on the cars. They feared that a high-tech American car could serve as a mobile spy, collecting images and mapping out secret locations. Musk had to act fast to keep the peace. You watch as he appears via video at a major conference in China, sounding a lot more diplomatic than he does on American social media. He promised that Tesla would never use its cars to spy in China because if Tesla used cars to spy in China or anywhere, we will be shut down. To prove his point, Tesla built a dedicated data center in Shanghai to store all information collected from Chinese drivers locally. This was a major concession. It meant that the brain of the cars sold in China was effectively under the jurisdiction of Chinese laws. The tension didn't stop there. You trace a series of public relations fires that seemed to ignite all at once. There was the angry customer at the Shanghai Auto Show who climbed on top of a Tesla, claiming her brakes had failed. The video went viral instantly. In the past, the Chinese government might have stepped in to quiet the noise. Instead, state media joined the chorus, criticizing Tesla for being arrogant. It was a clear signal. The golden child was being grounded. There's still a real disagreement on whether these events were organic consumer complaints or a coordinated effort by the state to humble a foreign giant. Some analysts point out that this pressure coincided exactly with the moment local Chinese brands like BYD and NIO were finally ready to compete on a global level. The Catfish House had done its job, and now it was time for the local fish to take over the pond. As we move into 2024 and 2025, the tightrope walk becomes even more dangerous. You notice Musk's public comments on geopolitics shifting in a way that often aligns with Beijing's interests. Whether it was suggesting a special administrative zone for Taiwan or praising the efficiency of Chinese workers while criticizing Americans, his words carried weight. In April 2024, Musk made an unannounced trip to Beijing to meet with Premier Li Qiang. He wasn't there for a ribbon cutting this time. He was there to beg for permission to roll out his full self-driving software and to figure out how to transfer data across borders to train his AI. The stakes were massive. Without Chinese data, Tesla's AI would be fighting with one hand tied behind its back. But giving that data to an American company is something Beijing is incredibly hesitant to do. You see the dilemma. Musk needs China's market and data to survive the next decade of AI development. China needs Musk to keep the local industry sharp, but they don't want him to be the leader anymore. By the start of 2026, the power balance has clearly shifted. The man who once held all the cards in Shanghai is now the one waiting in the lobby, hoping for an invitation to the inner circle. As we move into 2026, the factory in Shanghai remains the beating heart of the Tesla empire. It now produces over half of the company's total global volume. Without those assembly lines, Tesla would effectively shrink by 50% overnight. But that massive success comes with a very heavy chain. You notice this weight most clearly whenever Elon Musk tries to push for his next big dream, full self-driving. Just this week, in January 2026, Musk made a bold claim at the World Economic Forum in Davos. He told the crowd that his self-driving software could be approved in China as early as next month. It was a classic Elon time moment that sent the stock market into a brief frenzy. However, the response from Beijing was swift and remarkably blunt. Within 24 hours, Chinese state media outlets reported that these claims were simply not true. They clarified that the regulatory process is nowhere near finished. It was a public sit-down for the world's richest man. It served as a stark reminder that in China, the government sets the timeline, not the CEO. This tension shows the true nature of the Shanghai Trap. Musk needs that approval to justify Tesla's massive valuation, but Beijing holds the only key to the door. While Tesla was busy navigating these regulations, the Catfish Effect finally reached its logical conclusion. In 2025, the local student officially surpassed the master. BYD officially took the crown as the world's largest battery electric vehicle maker. For the first time since 2019, Tesla even fell off the podium of the top 3 manufacturers in the Chinese market. The domestic brands have used the years of competing with Tesla to perfect their own supply chains and tech. Now, they are the ones leading the charge. Finance people still go back and forth on whether the Shanghai deal was a brilliant survival strategy or the ultimate intellectual property giveaway. Some argue that without China, Tesla would have gone bankrupt years ago. Others contend that Musk effectively built the very industry that is now threatening to dismantle his dominance. The outcome of this decade-long saga is a strange, permanent stalemate. Tesla is too big to leave China, and China is too invested in Tesla's supply chain to let it fail. but the power dynamic has completely flipped. You see a man who used to dictate terms to the world now having to walk a very fine line to keep his most important factory running. The Mudtown field is now a fortress, but it's a fortress where the landlord keeps a very close eye on the tenant. The takeaway here isn't just about cars or batteries, it's a lesson in what happens when a global disruptor meets a sovereign superpower. Musk didn't just build a factory. He entered a partnership where the exit strategy was never part of the deal. He became the master of two worlds, but in doing so, he might have discovered that he doesn't truly own either of them. The story of the Shanghai Gigafactory is still being written, and it changes with every headline. It's a fascinating look at how the world of high finance and global politics can collide in a single muddy field. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Where are you watching from today, and what's the economic vibe like in your neck of the woods? Are you seeing more Teslas on the road, or are the local brands starting to take over your neighborhood? It's always interesting to see how these massive global shifts actually look on the ground in different parts of the world. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the hidden deals of the tech world, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit that like button. It helps the channel more than you know. And if you want to keep up with these stories and see where the global economy is heading next, make sure to subscribe. We have a lot more coming your way soon. Thanks for hanging out and listening to the story. I'll see you in the next one.